Oopsie, it appears that Vice President Kamala Harris plagiarized parts of her 2009 criminal justice book. That's according to new reporting from City Journal's Christopher Rufo. Rufo reports that, quote, Kamala Harris plagiarized at least a dozen sections of her criminal justice book, who's titled Smart on Crime, according to a new investigation. The current vice president even lifted material from Wikipedia. Now, Rufo's team found that multiple violations were comparable in severity to the plagiarism found in former Harvard president Claudine Gay's doctoral thesis. CNN also reviewed several of the passages highlighted by Rufo, found that Harris and her co-author failed to properly attribute language to sources. As an example, Rufo points out that in one section of the book, Harris, without proper attribution, quote, reproduced extensive sections from a John Jay College of Criminal Justice press release. She and her co-author passed off the language as their own, copying multiple paragraphs virtually verbatim. As another example, in a section about a New York court program, Harris, quote, stole long passages directly from Wikipedia, which is long considered an unreliable source by some. She not only assumes that online encyclopedia's accuracy, but copies its language nearly verbatim without citing the source. That's from Rufo. For context, Harris co-authored her book, at the beginning of her political career, the run-up to her campaign to serve as California's Attorney General. The book was meant to help establish her credibility on criminal justice issues. We requested the Harris campaign's response, but we did not receive one as of yet.
Unsurprisingly, the story took off on conservative social media. Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, reacted to the story, tweeting, quote, "Hi, I'm J.D. Vance. I wrote my book, unlike Kamala Harris, who copied hers from Wikipedia."
Fox News contributor Joe Concha wrote, quote, "Gotta say this is the least surprising thing I've read in quite some time. Bit ironic that plagiarism is what doomed Biden's first run for president back in 1988. Then again, the media will completely ignore this because of who is breaking the story, and that's just a whole bowl of wrong." Donald Trump Jr. wrote, quote, "Yikes, more evidence that Kamala Harris is a fraud." And I saw that the New York Times actually has covered this controversy, but let's not give them credit too quickly. Here is their headline: Conservative activist seizes on passage from Harris book.
Yeah.
They're seizing on the fact. Look, they found it's real. It is very serious plagiarism in my view. I've looked it over. It is extensive. It is passage after passage. For instance, that John Jay College press release, it's just copy and pasted, a long, substantial section. If you do that, you have to put it in quotes and say it's from John Jay College press release. You put it in quotes. This isn't even like an example where, like in some of the Claudine Gay stuff, where it was attributed to another source, but it was not paraphrased enough, and so you should have put it in quotes. This is not even attributed, and it's direct. It's not paraphrased at all. It's direct.
Facts are stubborn things. This is a 200-page book. There is one paragraph in which, by the way, they quoted from the John Jay release all the other citations, and one paragraph didn't have the quotes around it. But guess what? Right next to it, there was a citation. It just didn't have the quotes around it. This was like a clerical error. It was a mistake. Editors need to do a better job at this kind of thing. But this is such a nothing burger of a story, and it just shows how desperate the right wing is right now to win, that they're literally saying, oh, they forgot to use a quote, when 5 other paragraphs from that same thing, which was cited, by the way, in the footnotes next to the paragraph, had quotes around it. This is such a nothing burger.
It's not a nothing burger at all. I'm sorry,
really
that's
don't have any. It was not plagiarism. CNN did a whole fact check on this. Robby, are you serious?
It's absolutely plagiarism. It meets the definition of plagiarism
if the page has 4 paragraphs with quotes around it citing that it was from this John Jay press release, and one paragraph does not have quotes around it, but it also has a citation of the press release.
It's not one paragraph. It's 12 separate sections that do not have quotations or proper attribution. This is very serious. If this was a Republican candidate or pundit,
we wouldn't use it. We wouldn't use it. This is ridiculous.
Absolutely. CNN's K-File, great reporter, he does this all the time, finds examples of plagiarism from Republicans and Democrats. This has ruined Republican pundits' careers. He digs it up. He's reported it. It's well established that that's fair to do. This falls squarely in that category. If there's anything mitigating about it, it's that I don't actually believe she even wrote this book. She probably had some ghostwriter do it. So maybe it's on that person rather than her. I don't know if that makes it better necessarily, that I don't believe she actually wrote her own book. But it is definitely plagiarism. You just got to take the L.
No, they're grasping. They're really grasping.
That's not just my opinion, by the way. Ryan Grimm, progressive, former co-host of this show, he tweeted, "Good example of the New York Times just not being willing to take an L on Kamala's behalf. This is not a he said, she said. The book has a bunch of plagiarized sections. It just does." You can say that's not a reason not to vote for it, but it is plagiarism. It's not a nothing burger. It's clear academic, writerly misconduct.
John Jay was cited. This was an editorial issue. I mean, I would be very angry if I had found out that the editors didn't properly put things in quotes, but that is not Kamala Harris. She already cited where it came from. It's in the footnotes of
what about the section copy-pasted from Wikipedia?
The footnotes. Go look at the footnotes. This has just been fact-checked by CNN, as you stated.
You can't just put a footnote.
I understand that, and that's the editor's job. That is not Kamala Harris. And why are we even having this conversation 2 weeks before the election when you have a literal guy who wants to incite violence and is calling for the military
the election, will I be allowed
enemies?
to point out Kamala Harris's plagiarism? Where's the date on the calendar where it will be allowed to discuss some flaws of the...
Not quoting something properly, and that's the editor's fault.
At no point did I say that Kamala Harris's plagiarism is akin to inciting violence or is some reason to support Donald Trump. It's just bad in its own right. And this is exactly what's wrong with the democratic progressive worldview right now. Is just you must be required to overlook all the flaws in the candidate. I mean, I agree with you. It would have been better to visit some of these flaws of Kamala Harris in terms of an actual primary and debate process where voters on the Democratic side are deciding who is the least flawed candidate to be their person, who's the most compelling person. They did not do that. They just coronated Joe Biden and then were forced to concede that he is mentally incapable of being the president again, and dramatically and suddenly substituted him for Kamala Harris, who has not been vetted or tested or approved by any voters.
We were here 5 months ago.
Your side is in this situation where you have a deeply flawed candidate who has not been subjected to this bare minimum of scrutiny that would point out she plagiarized the book she wrote.
Robby, she is dealing with scrutiny at all levels. What I am saying is that the Republican Party right now, if this is what they're doing, it means they are trying so hard to damage her that they're taking something that is really a nothing burger. I've worked on campaigns. You've been covering campaigns for years. This is not something, I mean, you are really flailing at this point if you're starting to look at books and seeing that something wasn't, even though it was cited in the footnotes.
Plagiarism and Biden's first attempt at the presidency.
And he had to get out of the Democratic primary. But we're not talking about 1988 using a speech of a UK politician from the same speechwriter, by the way. We're talking about Kamala Harris 2 weeks before the election versus Donald Trump. And Donald Trump is so desperate that their people are, I mean, the fact that it got this much attention, and Joe Concha, spare me, you're in the media. Joe Concha at Fox News saying, the media reporter saying, the media is not going to pay attention, but I also speak on the largest news network in the world. And as I Google this, there are literally hundreds of articles, and we're talking about it right now. I just love how the GOP is always like, no one pays attention. No one pays attention to the criticisms of Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, if you see what progressives are talking about, and Democrats, we're furious at the New York Times based on their coverage of how this election is playing out.
It's the most, furious with the New York Times for not being pro-Kamala enough. It's actually literally insane.
Not understanding
their framing of this, the New York Times, is not Kamala Harris, the possible next president, plagiarized her book. That's not their headline. Their headline is conservative activist seizes on passages. How dare you notice that she engaged in the plagiarism? That's the reporting. That's the news. It's insane. It's deeply, it reflects an unwellness of the soul to be minimizing, to have to pretend these problems don't exist because you're so afraid of Republicans or Donald Trump.
Well, the publisher afterwards has literally admitted that they were at fault. So, I looked at even
falling on their sword
media.
For her. That's very kind.
Well, the Washington Examiner, conservative news outlet, is even saying that. So maybe it's a nothing burger. Maybe this is going to go away in 24 hours and nobody cares because nobody cares about a quote. They care about the economy. They care about how their lives are going to be better, and they care about democracy. I don't think they care about a poorly cited book from 20 years ago that the editors didn't cite properly. Like what? Wonkiness? Nobody cares. Bad move.
Well, you, the viewers, can tell us what you think. I'm sure we'll be covering this additionally on the show later this week. I might have something to say about it in a radar. Stay tuned. More Rising in just a minute.